The Business Cafe came about effectively where we were thinking and said, but how we can get leaders together in a more formal, informal kind of environment, where we can get speakers such as Piet to come and, this side, just before the Autonico rust really settles in, that we hear and gives us a bit of a shake and we say, but we need to start doing things. Okay, not that things aren't okay, but maybe okay is not enough. So this is the first of hopefully many that we will have. And I also just want to thank Andries and the team here at the Hawthorne Hotel for allowing us to be here today. Okay, so we're the first event here, and it's really a wonderful setting. Andries, baie dankie for that and for Jane and the team. So I just want to create very briefly just some context here. Just hope everything works. There we go. So for us, I'm going to just look holistically at the socio-economic environment. And why call it a landscape? Because if we look out here, we see a landscape. But maybe each of us, we see different things in a landscape. And sometimes the deeper you go and closer to it, you see, well, but it's not as nice as what it is from out there. So I think the complacency for us here in the Garden Route, and specifically George, must be, let's not be complacent with what we see out there, okay? But we need to be aware of changes and how do we address those changes. So I just want to give you just a few perspectives here. So this is two researchers I'm going to touch on very briefly. The one is the World Economic Forum that looks at the risks. And I think the important part here is if you look at what are the global risks, and this is the 21-22 research of which people in South Africa participated in. So we see the global risks is climate action, extreme weather, biodiversity, social cohesion, and livelihood crisis. Just look at those five. So those are the risks which are faced across the world, which they seem as the major risks. So if we dive down a little bit further there, so those are the factors or the categories of the risk, the economy, environment, geopolitical, societal, and then technology. And for today, we're going to get Piet to give us a bit of an overview of the political, economic side. And Joe is going to focus on just giving us a very brief view on the environmental side, what we're going to be looking at there. So when you look at this, it's verskriklik besig. Okay, but there's a guy called Professor Box. So Professor Box, you can Google him, genuine. He said all models are wrong. Some are useful. Okay. So let's look at the usefulness. And all that this thing really says is on this side here, we got the, let's say, categorized in terms of, those are the 5 risks, and then other risk factors on that side there. And we look at them briefly here from a South African perspective. So what the people that participate in South Africa, what they said is that there is prolonged economic stagnation, employment and livelihood issues, state collapse, failure of the public infrastructure, and proliferation of illicit economic activity. Those are the concerns, the top 5 that came out for us in South Africa. So if we look at the first one, prolonged economic stagnation, we know what is our growth rate. Well, anything from 0.2 to 1, whatever. So it depends what you read and who you have a look at. So we're not there. I think we got a population growth of, last I saw, 1.62 or something like that. So we're in trouble. So our economic growth rate, we need to start doing something on our side to say what we can do. So we've got colleagues here from the municipality. Kosi, who looks after strategy. We've got Charlotte here as one of the councillors. So, we must engage and say, but how do we get this environment that we can grow? How can they help us enable this? Okay, then it's the employment and livelihood crisis. And the big thing in South Africa at the moment is everyone talks about unemployment, but what are we really doing about it? What is interesting is that I think at the moment in time they're talking about 34%, but then the real is 46 or whatever. But the youth unemployment is around about anything from 61 to maybe about 74%. So anything in between, that's with youth unemployment. Now, if I can remember correctly, of the total population in South Africa, about 20.4 million of them are between the age of 15 and 29. And the unemployment rate there at 60%, 70%, you can imagine what's lying ahead for us if we don't get that right. The other thing with unemployment is that in November, around about last year, in the George Herald, there's Eugene, there was an article regarding the growth and everything in the garden route. And there it states via Wesgro, of all people, that the unemployment in the garden route is 15.38%. So wat jy waar kry. Okay. So, and I challenged them on that. And the answer that I got is said, yeah, but the people did the research, Genesis, it is like that. Okay. So, but we're sitting with unemployment. We just need to just ride down the streets in George and go into our different areas to see what's going on. State collapse. I think Pete will talk a lot about that in terms of the state collapse and what is all happening around there. We know that. Failure of public infrastructure. We just see communities are taking control. They're starting to fix the roads and they're starting to, is it their job? No. But they're doing that. The caution for us in the garden route is that, yes, we got the grant in George of 1.2 billion something for the infrastructure. Where is it going to be spent? We know our reticulation system has been under pressure for a long time. So we need to get this infrastructure, but the infrastructure needs to also be across the spectrum within our communities. So just mentioned briefly to Pete yesterday afternoon, if you ride in you from the airport and you see all of this, but we're still a bit, if we go that side of the highway, we have a different experience. And those are the things that we need to start addressing. Okay, the last one is proliferation of illicit economic activity. How we know COVID came, alcohol, tobacco. Pete referred to the mining, what's happening in the mining sector. We spoke about this morning. So those are things that are happening. So we need to be aware of what is happening. What they're saying in the world, what the guys are saying in South Africa, and we need to bring it home. Just an interesting sorry there. So it's very small. We'll make this available to you. So since COVID, what has worsened is the whole thing of social cohesion erosion. Okay, that is the factor that's worsened the most, or the risk has worsened the most. The second one is livelihood crisis. Okay, then there's the climate, and then I just want to focus on the one in the middle there. That goes about mental health. So those are things that are all societal, they're the red. So those are things that have worsened since COVID. Okay, now in this report, this is on the Economics and Peace, Institute of Economics and Peace. They've got 8 factors in their framework where they look at analyzing what positive peace is. Okay, and we're going to look at the negative of positive peace. But I think for each one of us in our minds, what is important here is just to look at the questions or answer for yourself, how well, the well-functioning government. Do we have a well-functioning government? Do we have a well-functioning Western Cape? Do we have a well-functioning Garden? Or do we have a well-functioning George? How would you rate us? Sound business environment. Do we have this? Is there an environment that's conducive to doing business? Equitable distribution of resources, and so we can carry on. There's a whole lot of questions. The one at the bottom in the high levels of human capital. Do we have high levels of human capital? Now, on that, in this research, where did South Africa come out? So this is how favorable is South Africa to bounce back economically post-COVID. So you can see we're way in the top here. Nou, ek kan nie sê dis reg of verkeerd nie. Ek het nie deel, but this is what the guys are saying. So let's be aware of this. I think that's the important part. Okay, so what do these researchers say? There's actually 2 things. How do we develop a positive peace? Develop positive peace. In other words, how do we score well on those 10 things? They came to 2 things. They said restoring trust within our societies. So how do we start restoring trust in our societies? We can't leave it to the politicians or to whatever. We, as leaders in the business, in our own rights, need to start restoring that trust. The other one is leaders finding new opportunities for collaboration. That is what these sessions are about. How do we collaborate? Okay. How do we start working together? How do we say, but let's identify a common kind of practice or common problem which we want to address. So the intent here is that, after we've all spoken, mainly is when we go out there, there's tables and there's chairs there, sit around, group together, chat informally, grab whoever you want to and say, come, give us some insight. And then from that, we'll start saying, but what are the solutions we can do, the small steps we can do. Okay, if we don't do that, then they say the whole lack of optimism, looking at leaders to say, but hang on guys, things aren't happening right here. We get to social unrest. So social unrest, the Institute of Economics and Peace have done research, and there's, I think, 12 things that they look at. There are 12 factors which define unrest or define define unrest. So, but what they found in the research in 2020, we were the 24th most unsafe country in the world of the research. The scary part is that 13% of the country's GDP was spent on curbing violence. So who did well? Security companies. Okay. So in this environment, you want to invest in security companies. All right. But we don't want to. We want to get out of that. What does that mean in rand terms? So I've read that our GDP for 2020 was about $400 billion US dollars, times that by 13%. How could we have spent that money productively in something else? Instead of hyping up security, cleaning up. We know what the impact of the unrest were in Natal and then partly in Gauteng in last year. There's another grouping that they looked also, they quote also the 2020 figures, and they say we came 15th and we were 24% of our GDP. So choose. I personally discussed this at the Garden Route and said, that is what is happening. I was given the answer to say, maar ons is anders. So I said, hoe anders? Okay, 10%, 50%? Vat 13% van die GDP van Garden Route, van George Municipaliteit. En sê, hoe anders is jy? En maal dit daarmee? Dis baie geld. Okay, so we need to take, the reality must come through here. Okay, so lastly, how do you feel about the economic landscape? As we sit here, how do you feel about the South African landscape? How do you feel like the Western Cape, and how do you feel like Garden Route, George? Okay. In this research, you can see that 84%, those last two, they're 23 plus 61, they are concerned and very worried. There's 16% that is positive. Okay, so you can't see there, but there's a Sergi Cadenza, he's an artist. So what he does, if you stand in front of his painting, I think it was a sculpture before, and he's got this technique. So if you look at his painting from left to right and you follow through it, it changes. Okay. So where are you, if we look at his painting, this painting of his, in terms of red, amber, green? Are you positive? Are you cautious? Or is it red? So what his painting looks like is the following. So if you're green, it's daar. If you move to cautious, that's what his painting looks like. And if you look there, that's where you are. So it's really up to us to be part of the solution. Okay. And let's start with small steps like this. So thank you very much.